Welcome to I-24 News. U.S. Vice President Mike Pence has just touched down in Israel for his third and final leg of his Middle East tour. His arrival follows visits in Jordan and Egypt, where he met with their leaders to discuss the Middle East peace process or American plans to advance it in the wake of President Trump's decision to recognize Jerusalem as the capital of Israel. We're bringing you live images now from Ben Gurion Airport in Tel Aviv, where the Vice President has just landed, and we're waiting for him to step out of that plane onto the red carpet, be welcomed by dignitaries before going off to Jerusalem, Colma, Israel. Here we have the door opening. No, and that is not the Vice President. Those are servicemen. Now in Israel, Pence will speak in the Israeli parliament on Monday and meet with Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. He will also head to the Western Wall, to Yad Vashem, Israel's National Holocaust Memorial, and will also meet with Israel's President Reuven Rivlin in Jerusalem on Tuesday. Prime Minister Netanyahu welcomed the Vice President to Israel ahead of his arrival, said there can be no progress on peace without the U.S. playing a leading role. We will cut back to these live images when we have the Vice President stepping off the plane. But for now, we have three special guests here in the studio. We have Lior Weintraub, former spokesman of the Israeli Embassy in Washington, D.C., our diplomatic correspondent, Mike Wagenheim, and our senior Middle East correspondent, Mohammed Al-Qassem. Welcome all. Lior, let's start with you. Mike Pence, Vice President of Donald Trump, visiting Israel now. Is this the American administration that Israel's right-wing government has been dreaming of for years?
Look, it depends which government, of course. Look, every visit of every high-ranking American official is important, especially when it comes to Vice President Pence, who has a leading role in the Trump administration and who has a long history and commitment to the State of Israel. So I think for the first time in many years now, we see the relationship in their best possible pattern when we are implementing the approach of no daylight, no surprises, and America is backing Israel when it's. But I mean,
not just on the question of no daylight and America backing Israel, also on the question of an American administration turning a blind eye to settlement construction, recognizing Jerusalem as Israel's capital. I mean, if Israel could have dreamt of a better, or the current Israeli government could have dreamt of a better American administration for it, could it?
No, I think you're looking at things in from a very technical point of view. Strategically, when every Israeli government and the Israeli public knows that the American administration has Israel's back, is willing to consider bigger risk when it comes to make crucial decisions on the peace process and in other decisions as well. So while the issue of settlement became a strategic issue during the Obama era, it is just one issue of many issues such as boundaries, security arrangement, Jerusalem, the issue of the wish of return. So normalizing this issue is one issue among many others. I think is part of the gains that we have with the relationship between the Netanyahu government and the Trump administration.
So as far as you read the map, as someone who served in the Israeli embassy in Washington, D.C., helped draft many of their statements and messaging, is there any daylight between the current Israeli government and the American administration? Are there relevant issues on which they disagree?
Obviously, there are some disagreements, but the best reality, the best thing that we can aspire for is that these disagreements are being handled behind closed door. And what we see is a show. We see a show of agreement, and when we decide, both sides decide to manage this disagreement behind closed door, this is where both sides can actually think creatively and see where they can move a little bit, while when things are being approached on the podiums, you see crises one after the other.
Mike Wagenheim, I want to get your take on this. This synergy we see between the American administration and the Israeli government, is it a question that both of them are on the same page in terms of how to address the conflict and therefore they agree? Or are we seeing a policy from the American administration of saying, we'll back our Israeli allies, whatever they want?
I think it starts with the fallacy that the American government speaks in one voice. First off, the American...
Well, not this administration at any rate.
This administration doesn't speak in one voice, and so I think what you've had up until the Jerusalem declaration by President Trump was mixed messaging, and I think the Israeli government was getting tired of the mixed messaging and very confused by it. You'd have Donald Trump saying one thing one day, Jared Kushner or Jason Greenblatt saying another, Rex Tillerson saying another, then this David Friedman saying something completely different. And so the Israeli government, I think, for the longest time was very confused as to the direction that the the American government was headed. I think now you're starting to hear, with the exception of David Friedman, the U.S. ambassador to Israel, who's very right-wing and is not towing the company line for the most part, I think you're starting to see a more cohesive message from the American administration, and I think it's very tuneful to the Israeli government's ears right now, and I think you're starting to see more of that synergy.
Mohammed, let's look at the Palestinian angle. The Palestinian government in Ramallah, are they also beginning to notice that the administration is becoming a little bit more coherent in its approach to the conflict? How are they responding to the multiplicity of voices within the American administration?
Well, I think the response or their reaction to President Trump's controversial decision has been publicly known for over a month, since December 6th, that evening when President Abbas said that the Americans have taken a stance to stand by Israel with in absolute agreement, adapting to the Israeli narrative. And this has been the case for almost every Palestinian official who have said publicly that the Americans have chosen to stand.
Okay, Mohammed, I'm afraid I have to cut you off because the Vice President of the United States is just getting off his airplane at Ben Gurion Airport. Let's have a look here. First person greeting him here, we have the head of protocol of the Foreign Ministry, the Israeli Foreign Ministry. There we have the Vice President and the Second Lady getting off the plane, waving. And the Vice President is being met by the Minister of Tourism, Yariv Levin. Israel doesn't have a formal Vice Prime Minister. He's been sent in order to welcome the Vice President. And then that appears to be Ron Dermer, Israel's ambassador to Washington. Next to him is David Friedman, the American ambassador to Tel Aviv, soon to be Jerusalem, possibly. Lior, ahead of this meeting, what do you think the Israeli government is going to want to get out of this visit? Is it pomp, circumstance, a lot of show and a display of friendship, or behind closed doors? Is Pence really coming for a business visit?
Look, symbolism aside, and there is a symbolic significance to this visit. I mean, people all over the Middle East going to see the visit and the close relationship Vice President Pence has with his Israeli counterpart, and it means a lot in terms of national security for Israel. People in Beirut, in Damascus, in Tehran will be watching. But there are many, as always, there are many items on the agenda. Some of them are crucial. How do we fix the Iran deal? How do we deal with the Iranian entrenchments in Syria?
And you see the Vice President being sent here as the emissary of the President rather than dealing with that through State Department lines.
Look,
is that unusual?
No, I think that every engagement that you have with a very senior official is an opportunity to convey message and to speak about the issues. And I think that also the peace process will be on the table, and especially some insight that the Vice President got in his meeting in Amman. Just came back from Cairo.
So you expect the Vice President will be coming with a message to Israeli Prime Minister from Arab leaders?
A message and some impressions, which I think will be valuable to the Israeli side as well.
Well, Mohammed, obviously the Arab side has shifted tremendously in the way that it approaches this question with the threat of Iran dangling over them. What message do you think, again, privately, not publicly, the Jordanian and Egyptian leaderships are going to be passing to Mr. Netanyahu?
Well, let's first talk about the Arab reaction. I think the Arabs are hugely divided on the issue of Trump's decision. But speaking about the Egyptians and the Jordanians, I see also a huge response to it. On one hand, I think the Egyptians are closer to the U.S. administration in terms of how they want to deal with the issue of Jerusalem. They believe that there is still wiggle, area or space to where the Palestinians can maneuver and say, well, okay, President Trump didn't talk or speak specifically about the final borders of Jerusalem, so maybe the Palestinians should get back to the negotiation tables. That was not the case for the Jordanians.
Okay, Mohammed, thank you. Let's cross now to Ben Gurion Airport in Tel Aviv, where our correspondent Maya Margit is on standby watching the pomp and circumstance. Maya, describe to us the scene at the airport. How large a welcoming ceremony have the Israelis put on for the American Vice President?
Well, there are several dignitaries and Israeli officials here at Ben Gurion Airport near Tel Aviv, including Israel's tourism minister Yariv Levin, as well as David Friedman, the U.S. ambassador to Israel, pardon me. And now U.S. Vice President Mike Pence has just stepped into the car. He just landed minutes ago, and he just stopped off of U.S. Air Force 2, the official plane for the U.S. Vice President. There's a lot of security here at the airport, Israeli and U.S. flags everywhere, and the security forces have been deployed across Jerusalem as well, where he will be staying. As well, several roads are closed, including the main road into Jerusalem, so several roads will be closed off. And this is not the first visit for Pence. He has been here several times. He has a strong connection to Israel. He's an evangelical Christian, and he has pushed for a shift in U.S. policy towards the Middle East and towards Israel in particular. This is the last leg of his journey to the Middle East. He was previously in Jordan and in Egypt just a day ago.
Maya, we see now that the Vice President has got into his car. From your understanding, is anything else going to take place at the airport, or was that it, a very short welcoming ceremony with a few flags and a red carpet, and off he goes to Jerusalem?
Yes, it seems like it's going to be a very short ceremony, not a long one. He will be heading to King David Hotel in Jerusalem, where he will be staying. And then tomorrow, that's where everything really begins for his trip. He will be speaking at the Knesset, the Israeli parliament. Of course, the Joint Arab List party will be boycotting it because of the recent declaration, the U.S. recognition of Jerusalem as Israel's capital, and the promise to move the U.S. embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem. So that key policy shift in the Trump administration is going to probably color his visit to the region, but most of what he will be doing will begin tomorrow morning. He will also be having a dinner at Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's residence in the evening, and then on Tuesday he will be visiting the Western Wall in Jerusalem, which is going to be one of the highlights of the trip. And it's also important for me to point out that Kalev Ben-David, our anchor for the Rundown, will be sitting down tomorrow for an exclusive interview with Karen Pence, Mike Pence's wife, so stay tuned for that.
Okay, Maya Margit at Ben Gurion Airport, thank you very much. Lior, I want to turn to you. You previously served as a spokesman for the Israeli mission in Washington, D.C. If you were advising the Israeli government this time, handling Mike Pence's visit, what would you warn them to watch out for? What are the small hiccups, the misunderstandings and disagreements that could end up causing diplomatic embarrassment?
Look, there's nothing spontaneous about a good visit. A good visit is something that is being worked on very thoroughly for a very long time, both on the diplomatic level, but also on the communication level, obviously logistics. So there won't be any surprises here. Now, especially when the two administrations are like-minded, and there's no tense like there used to be during the Obama era, I think that there won't be any surprises. Obviously, the disagreements are already mapped and already decided how to deal with. I would, I would talk to him. I would urge, my leaders, if I was a diplomat today, to be generous with the approach to the peace process, because as of now, as we've talked just a few minutes ago, the Palestinian side is taking a very unfortunate approach, and when Israel is being perceived and also taking action as open for a dialogue and for peace process, I think Israel's standing and also the relationship between the U.S. and Israel, when it comes to this angle, are much better. Okay, Leo, well, as you say, everything for a diplomatic visit is ironed out in advance, including the Prime Minister's welcome for Mike Pence. He congratulated him on arriving even before he landed. Let's have a listen to what the Prime Minister had to say.
A great friend of the State of Israel arrives here this evening, a true friend, United States Vice President Mike Pence. We will welcome him here, and I am looking forward to our discussions. We will welcome the Trump administration's effort to halt Iran's aggression, the Iranian nuclear program, and ways to advance peace and security in the region. Anyone who truly wants to fulfill those goals know there is no substitute to the United States leadership. I see it as a disgrace that lawmakers intend to boycott and even disrupt this important visit at the Knesset. We will be there and give Vice President Pence the great honor that he deserves.
Well, as you can imagine, the pleasure with which Israeli leaders are preparing to welcome U.S. Vice President Mike Pence is being matched in equal part by displeasure on the Palestinian side. The Palestinians have announced they won't accept any U.S. mediation in the peace process and won't meet any American officials either, in protest at America's recognition of Jerusalem as Israel's capital. Let's have a listen to what Hanan Ashrawi from the Palestine Liberation Organization had to say about the visit.
Very clearly, Palestinian and Arab public opinion certainly not happy with Pence's visit to the region. They've even called upon their leaders in Jordan and Egypt not to receive him, because Pence had just succeeded in pushing for the removal of Jerusalem from the negotiations table and handing it over to the occupying power Israel in a flagrant violation of international law and the most basic requirements of peace. Pence has an agenda that is extremist, fundamentalist, literalist, Christian, absolutist ideology, which goes against all the beliefs and commitments of the Arab and Palestinian Christians in particular, and they feel that they have been betrayed by somebody who is dealing them a tremendous injustice using religion as a justification.
Mohammed, how long can the Palestinians keep up this policy of snubbing the world's largest superpower?
Well, it all depends on the actions that President Abbas is taking right now. He has shifted his strategy from being directly dealing with the U.S. as the U.S. the only mediator in this conflict. Now he is eyeing the European Union, Russia, China, as well as the United Nations. He's looking into a model similar to the model that was signed with the Iranians.
But whoever might be a mediator, they're saying, okay, we don't accept the Americans as a mediator. At the same time, we're not even going to talk to the Americans.
But he's not saying that he doesn't want the Americans as part of this whole equation. All he's saying is that the Americans should not be the only one involved in the peace process, as they have proved themselves to not being an honest broker, and they should include others, such as, again, the European Union, Russia, China, and the United Nations. He said if that succeeded with the Iranian nuclear negotiations and produced an agreement that has been acceptable to all these powers and institutions, then maybe this the longest conflict of modern history should be a model, maybe found a way into it, or a resolution to it similar to that. All the Palestinians are saying at this point that the Americans should not be the sole mediators in this conflict. Whether they will continue with this and how long, it all depends on how the European Union, mainly, not so much Russia or China. If the European Union gives President Abbas the support that he needs, and he will be there tomorrow, he'll be speaking in Brussels to the European Union ministers, and we know that the Europeans have criticized President Trump's decision in Jerusalem, saying that it should be a divided city. We know that they are for the two-state solution. They have not really shied away from this decision. As long as their support is strong enough, then President Abbas will definitely keep on going. But keep in mind, President Abbas is weakened also by the Arab positions. They have not been.
We're going to get into that discussion.
They have not been as strong as he hoped.
But for now, Lior, I mean, Mohammed raises a fascinating point here, which is that if the Palestinians think that the Americans are too close to the Israelis, they won't accept them as a mediator. I mean, does Israel have an interest in having some daylight with the Americans so they can at least keep up the semblance of being an honest mediator?
Look, Israel can't do the job for both sides. I think what is happening now with the Palestinians is unprecedented. It's very unfortunate. It's a tragedy and a travesty. I think they are disrespecting the U.S. administration. They're disrespecting the institution of the vice president, and they're disrespecting the vice president personally. And I think there'll be consequences for this behavior. And I think the Palestinians have an interest to renew and to reignite the peace process. They have other interests. That I think they have 600 million other interests when it comes to U.S. aid. And and every day that goes by, the Palestinian leadership are confirming the fears of peace-loving Israelis who are looking, and they're looking to find a partner, and what they find is kind of crazy speeches
I don't think that the Palestinians really feel that they are really disrespecting the U.S.
have they factored in the cost that the Americans could now say, you know what, you disrespect us? I mean, this is a fickle, impetuous president who doesn't like to be disrespected.
Just listening to kind of administration, their behavior is somewhat dissimilar to past administrations, and they'll take it to heart.
Mohammed, very briefly, because we're going to a break.
I think that the Palestinians believe that they were given the slap of the century. That's why they're reacting in kind.
And they're threatening to slap back, and I dare say the Americans aren't going to enjoy being threatened with being slapped by the Palestinians of all people. Gentlemen, thank you very much for going for a very short break. When we come back, we're going to be continuing the discussion, having a look more at the visit of U.S. Vice President Mike Pence to Israel. We'll be right back.
Stories that touch your heart and open your eyes. Stories that take you on a journey and show you something you will never forget. Look through the lens and see what others see. High definition, documentaries and discussions that connect us all. Join Lauren Izzo weeknights at 10:03 p.m. Eastern, only on I-24 News. U.S. Vice President Mike Pence is touching down in Israel this week, just as the Trump administration recognizes Jerusalem as the capital of the Jewish state. I-24 News will be there for every step the vice president takes in the Holy Land. Tune in Sunday through Tuesday, only on I-24 News.
What you need to know, the news, fast and to the point, and the in-depth interviews that will keep you in your seat from the people that you trust. I-24 News presents The New Rundown every Monday through Friday at 1 p.m. Eastern, co-hosted by Nurit Ben and Kalev Ben David. Only on I-24 News.
There's more to the news than meets the eye. Many voices, many faces, with interests often at odds. We take you deeper beyond the headlines, inside the drama, the controversy, bringing you fresh insights into the conflict, breakthroughs, heartaches, and victories shaping our world. Perspectives. There's more than just one view. Sunday to Thursday at 5:05 p.m. Eastern, only on I-24 News.
Welcome back to I-24 News. U.S. Vice President Mike Pence has just landed in Israel. He's on his way to Jerusalem, where we have our correspondent Jordana Miller standing by. Jordana, it's a big 48 hours in Jerusalem for Pence. Apart from the horrendous traffic, what else can we expect in Jerusalem on that visit?
Yeah, it's true. There's going to be a lot of bad traffic here. Citizens not too happy about that. But this is the place where really the drama is going to play out. Vice President Pence, of course, a deeply religious man, an evangelical Christian. He famously said on his first visit here that in his mind and in his heart, he felt he'd been to Israel a million times. And this is really for him going to be a victory lap, at least on the Israeli side. Remember, long before Trump came into office, before he was even on the political scene, it was Pence more than a decade ago when he entered Congress, already pushing for the recognition of Jerusalem as the capital of Israel, already pushing for the U.S. Embassy to relocate here. So he will come here and be showered with praise by most of the Israelis here. Of course, there is a group of Israeli Arab lawmakers who plan to protest and not show up for his speech at the Israeli parliament. But aside from that, he's going to be given the royal treatment. Now, particularly one stop on this tour in Jerusalem that will definitely be controversial will be his stop at the Western Wall. Now, until President Trump himself showed up there for the first time in May, no American president or high-ranking officials went there. It's located, the Western Wall, in East Jerusalem, what formerly was considered contested territory. But Pence will go there. We do not believe he'll go with any Israeli politicians, but he will go there. He may make some remarks there, and that, of course, will just underscore the kind of anger on the Palestinian side and really add new questions to the Trump administration's claims that even though they have called Jerusalem the capital of Israel, they're not talking about boundaries, they're not talking about final sovereignty issues. But to have Pence at the Western Wall is going to send a message that says something quite different.
Jordana, Mike Pence will be at the Western Wall. Of course, when President Trump recognized Jerusalem as Israel's capital, he said he wasn't recognizing any particular boundaries, but he did specify the Western Wall, at least, is in Jerusalem as he recognizes it. Do we know whether the Americans are defining this as a private visit, or is Mike Pence, Vice President of the United States, visiting the Western Wall in Jerusalem, Israel?
The Vice President of the United States seems to be going on an official stop to the Western Wall. This isn't in any way being advertised as a private visit. And again, the Vice President reiterating, as we heard today from Amman, the capital of Jordan, saying that the President's decision on Jerusalem, its recognition of Israel as the capital of Israel, was meant to not say anything about final boundaries, not to preclude discussions of the Palestinians having some sovereignty here. But as is the case sometimes here in the Middle East, it seems that we are hearing words on the one hand and then we're seeing actions on the other. So the Vice President will go visit there, and that will, in a sense, say that this is part of Israel and maybe not up for negotiation.
Okay, Jordana Miller in Jerusalem, waiting attentively for the arrival of Vice President Mike Pence. Thank you very much. Well, before arriving in Israel, Mike Pence met with Jordan's King Abdullah in Amman. Upon his arrival in the Jordanian capital, Pence was greeted by protesters demonstrating against the American decision to recognize Jerusalem as the Israeli capital. Pence hopes to convince Arab leaders to persuade the Palestinian leadership to accept the upcoming American peace plan, despite the anger in Ramallah. Jordan's king told Vice President Pence that East Jerusalem must be the capital of a Palestinian state.
Your visit here, I'm sure, is to rebuild the trust and confidence in not only how we move forward with a two-state solution on, for us, June 4th, 1967 lines and East Jerusalem as a capital of an independent Palestinian state, but living side by side with a secure and recognized Israel in accordance with international laws and the Arab Peace Initiative.
President Trump made a historic decision to recognize Jerusalem as the capital of Israel, but as he also made clear in that decision, that we are committed to continue to respect Jordan's role as the custodian of holy sites, that we take no position on boundaries and final status. Those are subject to negotiation.
Earlier, I-24 News correspondent Elena Bufata spoke to residents of Amman and asked them about Pence's visit to the region.
Honestly, the relations between us and America has been and always will be the same. The Jordanian people here doesn't get affected much by the events, and it's hard for them to do anything. So his visit here to the Jordanian people won't make a difference, but when it comes to his visit to the country, it means more stability.
I think the American Vice President's visit won't change anything, and the reality we are living now is forced upon us. It's out of our hands. Whether he comes or not, he won't change anything.
This visit will have a positive impact on the Arab region in general, and Jordan specifically. I'm sure there will be negotiations with the government and the Jordanian king, and I hope it includes good things for the country. Regarding his visit to Jerusalem, I hope it includes talks that make them retract their decision about announcing Jerusalem as the capital of Israel.
Mohammed Al-Qasem, very briefly, we heard a really extraordinary caveat from Vice President Mike Pence saying we're recognizing Jerusalem as Israel's capital, but we're not jumping over Jordan's historic role in Jerusalem. What is he talking about?
He's trying to ease the concerns of King Abdullah II and the Jordanians, whom, after the Palestinians, have been extremely furious with President Trump's decision regarding East Jerusalem, as Jordan believes that they are the custodians of the Islamic and Christian sites in East Jerusalem, and taking that away takes away their legitimacy. That's something that is important to
Jordan. A role that's in writing in the
absolutely, and that was extremely important to
we have to go for a break now, but we're going to be back in just a minute to continue the discussion with our guests as I-24 News brings you rolling coverage of the visit of U.S. Vice President Mike Pence in Israel after America's historic recognition of Jerusalem as the capital of Israel. Don't go away. We'll be back in just a minute.
Israel, the Middle East, the world. Get your daily dose every morning on I-24 News. News from around the world to around the corner. Jeff Smith brings you the top stories, the hard news, and analysis you need to know. Weekday mornings at 7:05 a.m. Eastern, only on I-24 News. Fearless, timely, and always engaging. Every night, David Schuster brings the news from around the world to your front door. Watch Stateside, weeknights at 9 p.m. Eastern, only on I-24 News.
Welcome back to I-24 News. U.S. Vice President Mike Pence has just touched down in Israel for the third and final leg of his Middle East tour. It's no ordinary visit. It's the first visit of such a senior American official after America recognized Jerusalem as the capital of Israel. Pence's arrival follows visits in Jordan and Egypt, where he met with the two countries' leaders to discuss Middle East peace, or rather the lack of it, in the wake of President Trump's decision to recognize Jerusalem as the capital of Israel. Now, in Israel, as of about 20 minutes ago, Pence will speak in the Israeli parliament on Monday. He'll meet with Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. He will also head to the Western Wall inside Jerusalem's Old City, as well as the Holocaust Memorial Yad Vashem. He'll also meet with Israel's President Reuven Rivlin in Jerusalem on Tuesday. Prime Minister Netanyahu welcomed Vice President Pence to Israel ahead of his arrival and said there can be no progress on peace without the United States playing a leading role.
A great friend of the State of Israel arrives here this evening, a true friend, United States Vice President Mike Pence. We will welcome him here, and I am looking forward to our discussions. We will welcome the Trump administration's effort to halt Iran's aggression, the Iranian nuclear program, and ways to advance peace and security in the region. Anyone who truly wants to fulfill those goals know there is no substitute to the United States leadership. I see it as a disgrace that lawmakers intend to boycott and even disrupt this important visit at the Knesset. We will be there and give Vice President Pence the great honor that he deserves.
Vice President Mike Pence, however, is not scheduled to meet any Palestinian leaders because they're refusing to meet him in an act of protest against the U.S. government's recognition of Jerusalem as the capital of Israel. The Palestinians, of course, claiming East Jerusalem as the capital of their future state. Pence's trip was originally planned for December, but tensions and condemnation from Arab political and religious leaders caused the trip to be delayed. Trump's Jerusalem decision drew public condemnation, at least from the Arab world, including from America's allies.
Very clearly, Palestinian and Arab public opinion certainly not happy with Pence's visit to the region. They've even called upon their leaders in Jordan and Egypt not to receive him because Pence had just succeeded in pushing for the removal of Jerusalem from the negotiations table and handing it over to the occupying power Israel in a flagrant violation of international law and the most basic requirements of peace. Pence has an agenda that is extremist, fundamentalist, literalist, Christian absolutist ideology, which goes against all the beliefs and commitments of the Arab and Palestinian Christians in particular, and they feel that they have been betrayed by somebody who is dealing them a tremendous injustice using religion as a justification.
Okay, here in the studio we have Yitzhak Levanon, former Israeli ambassador to Egypt. Thank you for joining us, as well as our diplomatic correspondent Mike Wagenheim and our senior Middle East correspondent Mohammed Al-Qasim. Mr. Levanon, let's start with you. Egypt, traditionally a backer of the Palestinian cause, but something has changed in Egypt's stance on the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. How do you read the map now? What are Egypt's interests in the question of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict?
Well, basically, I think that Egypt did not change any of its standing for the 40 or 50 years ago, meaning that they support what the Palestinian Authority is asking, meaning also that this is the independent state and East Jerusalem as its capital. This is the position, official position by the Egyptians, which are supporting the Palestinian Authority. The private position, Egypt is doing two things. saying this, and publicly, by the way, to the Palestinians, look, learn from our experience with the Israeli, because this is a very positive and excellent experience with the Israelis. So go and do exactly the same. So meaning they are pushing the Palestinians to be more flexible or to reach, you know, some kind of understanding with the Israelis, or to come back to the table of negotiations. The second thing that Egypt is doing, that quietly and behind the scenes, with the Saudis, with the Americans, with the Israelis, with some people, trying to find out probably a kind of a way out of the stagnation of today. And this is why, you know, they thought about Ramallah as a capital, Abu Dis as a capital, or anything else which can help. But definitely, the official decision is they support the Palestinian Authority with the claim of East Jerusalem as the capital.
Well, that's the official position, but the private position is something else. Mohammed Al-Qasem, a report in the New York Times recently, an extraordinary story, saying that Egyptian intelligence had been given briefings to Egyptian talk show hosts, telling them, don't make a big deal out of the American recognition of Jerusalem as Israel's capital. We don't want to ignite another intifada. That would only help the Islamists. That's not in our interest. I mean, this is an extraordinary U-turn in Egyptian foreign policy.
Absolutely. In fact, they have gone as far as to say, what's the difference between Ramallah and Jerusalem? This is something that is, if you really want to dissect President Mahmoud Abbas's two speeches, the one that he gave on Sunday when the Central Council of the PLO was meeting, and also 2 days after in Cairo, in all of places at Al-Azhar, where he said, and he was angry at the Arab backing, and in fact he has been called out by some Arab officials, saying, well, we haven't seen strong Palestinian reaction to President Trump's recognition of Jerusalem as the capital of Israel. Therefore, that's why we weren't as strong in backing you publicly as you are asking us to be. And Egypt has always been instrumental in its support to the Palestinians. Officially, yes, we know that they are calling and saying the things that the Palestinian Authority wants to hear. But that's not enough. I think what is being done right now is there is tremendous pressure being exerted on President Mahmoud Abbas, and he spoke about it. He didn't mention Egypt by name, but he said some Arab leaders and governments are exerting pressure on us to change our position. And I do believe, according to some of the conversations that I've had with Palestinian officials in Ramallah and elsewhere, that he was speaking about President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi as well as the Saudi monarchs, both the Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman as well as King Salman, his father. And that's why the Palestinians aren't really happy with this public support from the Arab governments. They need substantial, tangible steps on the ground to make sure that if they say we are boycotting Vice President Pence, that means something. And that is something that is lacking in the eyes of the Palestinians.
And Mohammed, again, in this extraordinary shift in the Arab world's position, is this a new opportunity now for Israel to be able to get the Arab world on board to pressure the Palestinians to accept the sort of deal that in the past wouldn't have been acceptable to them, but now they have no choice? Mike?
Yeah, I think at this point the Palestinians don't have very many friends that are willing to go to bat for them, and that's the difference. You can hold a position for 40, 50 years. How much conviction do you have behind the position? How much oomph, how much zeal do you have? Or is it just a position that you put out there and really don't have any convictions behind anymore? Places like Egypt dealing with terrorism in Sinai, dealing with economic problems. They need the U.S. They need Israel. Jordan is the same way. They're dealing with problems internally, with radicalism. They're dealing with economic problems. They need the United States, and they need a decent relationship with Israel as well. The Palestinians used to have friends that are willing to go to bat for them. I think they're starting to realize now they're isolated. Mahmoud Abbas has two avenues to take. He can either come out fighting, or he could come out and say, you know what, I'm going to take what I can get. Right now, he's choosing to fight.
Mr. Lebanon, I mean, as you said, the Egyptian official position has remained unchanged, but the private position has changed, and that means that what Egypt is actually doing in tangible terms to help the Palestinians has also changed. I mean, what sort of real support is Egypt giving the Palestinians now, other than words?
Well, first of all, you know, a short remark, you know, because we spoke about the intelligence. You mentioned that the Egyptian intelligence are asking the newspapers, you know, not to deal with the question of Jerusalem. Egyptian officially denied. But if you will take, you know, on the ground and you read all the newspapers since then till today, in fact, you don't see that the press in Egypt are dealing with the question of Jerusalem. So definitely there is something going behind the scenes. And this is exactly what the Palestinians feel. Look, Abu Mazen, Mahmoud Abbas understand now clearly that in the triangle called, the Saudis, the Jordanian, and the Egyptians, this triangle is not with him.
And I mean,
at least two of the three. At least two of the
triangle. I mean, who is his strongest supporter? Who's the last Mohican standing up for the Palestinians in that trio?
Look, the monarch, the king, is in a very difficult situation. Look, he is the custodian of the Islamic holy shrines in Jerusalem. At least according, to the peace treaty. He doesn't want to lose that. So he has to be really, to deal with the Palestinians and with the Israelis and with everybody in order to keep that.
Okay,
Egypt has a different...
We have to go for a break. We're going to discuss this in a lot more detail, believe me. Mohammed and Mike, Mr. Itzhak Lebanon, thank you very much. We're going for a very short break. When we come back, we'll be continuing the discussion of the visit of Vice President Mike Pence to Israel. Don't go away.
Politics, economics, business, and technology. Get the real news and the real insight about what's happening around the world. Michelle McCory breaks down the top stories of the day from the Middle East to the U.S. Weeknights beginning at 7 p.m. Eastern. Go beyond the headlines every day on I-24 News. Host Ami Kaufman talks to the news makers and pundits to bring you the story behind the headlines. The Spin Room with Ami Kaufman, Sunday to Thursday at 8:05 p.m. Eastern.
I'm Emily Francis on I-24 News. Join us on Trending right here on the show that shines the light on the many amazing people doing positive work to inspire. This is the show about building bridges.
Weekdays at 8 a.m. Eastern, only on I-24 News.
In the Holy Land, there are wonders most people never get to see. I-24 News will take you inside the shadows and unravel the secrets of some of the world's most revered sites in a way you've never experienced. All access from every angle. Tune in to Sacred Sites 360, Sunday 9 p.m. Eastern, only on I-24 News.
I-24 News.
Welcome back to I-24 News. U.S. Vice President Mike Pence is currently on the highway on his way to Jerusalem from Ben Gurion Airport in Tel Aviv. He's visiting on the third and final leg of his trip to the Middle East that's seen him take in Jordan and Egypt. And speaking of Egypt, we have Israel's former ambassador to Egypt, Itzhak Lebanon, here with us in the studio. Before the break, you were just telling us that actually, since President Trump's recognition of Jerusalem as Israel's capital, the Egyptian press, possibly on instructions from Egyptian intelligence, hasn't been making a big deal of the president's decision at all.
Well, those are the facts. Because I'm saying this because we have seen also that the officials in Egypt and the government have denied that anybody intervened with the editors, in the press, in the media. But the fact is that since that time, and I'm talking about 2 weeks ago, you don't have anything in Egypt, in the press, talking about Jerusalem. They are talking about different things. They are talking, by the way, about the presidential elections, about Sisi, about Annan. They are talking that Annan is competing, with the president, that he is pro-Muslim Brotherhood. So they do have their own problems, definitely. Egypt of Sisi, concerning the Palestinian issue, is not the same like predecessors of El-Sisi.
Extraordinary. We have to go to, now we have a report, because while on the visit, Pence is not only representing the president, he's also representing the large evangelical base of the Republican Party. Let's take a further look into a profile of the life of the vice president.
I love what he just said.
In the high-stakes political drama playing out on the world stage, U.S. Vice President Mike Pence might be the understudy for the main character, Donald Trump.
Donald,
Jay.
But back home, Pence is often described as a powerful right-hand man, a bridge to the establishment. A former governor of Indiana, Pence is seen by many Republicans as a trusted, solid figure, the calm counterweight to the often unpredictable, temperamental president. But first and foremost, Pence is an evangelical Christian.
Now, people who know me well know I'm a pretty basic guy. I'm a Christian, a conservative, and a Republican in that order.
Growing up in Columbus, Indiana, his family went to church 6 days a week, and still today, he's one of the country's most openly religious politicians. Pence believes God has a plan which has landed him here as the first in line for the presidency of the United States. He's the warrior of the evangelicals, a group that played an essential part in Trump's stunning election victory in 2016. As former Trump strategist Steve Bannon has put it, Trump has the populist nationalists, but Pence is the base. Without Pence, you don't win. This week, Pence is visiting the Middle East, representing the president and representing the evangelicals of America, who are unyielding and outspoken in their support for Israel.
If the world knows nothing else, the world will know this. America stands with Israel.
Last month, Trump took the controversial step of officially recognizing Jerusalem as the capital of Israel. The evangelical base had been calling for this for decades. Did the president make his decision because of them? Either way, as Trump announced it, Vice President Pence was right there with him. Bianca Zanini, I-24 News.
Mike Wagenheim, previously when Pence scheduled his trip to Israel cancelled because of tax reform in the U.S. Senate, a large number of Christian leaders in the Holy Land said they wouldn't meet Mike Pence. Very embarrassing for him since he comes as a Christian evangelical politician. I mean, why did that happen? Why did we see Christian leaders turning on this great supporter of Christians in the Middle East?
Well, not only embarrassing because of his background, but embarrassing because that was the message that he was supposed to bring, is the plight of Christians in the Middle East and how they're being erased from certain areas here, and trying to get the world's attention, that he tries to deliver that message, or was going to. The Coptic Christians in Egypt saying, no thanks, we don't want to meet with you. Christians in Bethlehem said, no thanks, we don't want to meet with you. So it was doubly embarrassing because that was the message.
I mean, were they being pressured
carry.
Into that position? I mean, what's behind their refusal to meet with him?
I think there's some pressure to that position. I think it's a popular position to take after the announcement came of Donald Trump's recognition of Jerusalem. I think it was in solidarity with the Palestinian cause more than anything else. Not so much that we're opposed to his message of Christianity, but we're opposed to the message that his administration is bringing and the steps
opposed
that
to
they're
this specific administration.
Exactly.
I want to ask you all about a report we saw in Israeli media that the Palestinians believe that what the Americans are actually proposing is a deal in which they would get a state on 90% of the West Bank, Israel would keep 10%, Israel would retain a permanent security presence across the West Bank, and they wouldn't get a centimeter of Jerusalem because their capital of their new state would be on the outskirts of Jerusalem. Mohammed, tell us a little bit about where Palestinian negotiator Saeb Erekat got this idea from, and how credible this is.
Well, what we're getting is that this is leaked information, and also reports from Israeli media that says that Dr. Erekat, who is the Secretary General of the Palestine Liberation Organization, got him this report of 20 pages or more, that he studied it. He did not like anything in it. He did not sign off on it, and he passed it on to President Mahmoud Abbas just before that speech on Sunday during the first day of meetings from the Palestinian Liberation or Palestine Liberation Organization Central Council. And that's probably the reasons, if this is true, why President Abbas was also extra upset or furious or angry, whatever adjective you want to use here, describing his speech and anger at the United States, because the Palestinians, generally speaking, since the announcement made by President Trump, they do believe that the Americans and the U.S. administration have pretty much bought into the Israeli narrative, and they have adapted the Israeli side of the story, and they're going with it. So they do believe that because, first of all, President Trump came out and said Jerusalem is the capital of Israel. He did not say anything regarding that to the Palestinians.
So they think that he's sort of gone native in a sense. Itzhak Levanon, former ambassador of Israel to Egypt. I mean, if the Americans really present such an offer and say Palestinian state on 90% of the West Bank, full Israeli security control, not a centimetre of East Jerusalem. Is the Arab world going to go along with it and say, yes, we'll agree to pressure the Palestinians to accept it, or is it a non-starter for Egypt?
Do you have an Arab
Jordan?
world now?
Well,
homogenic? No, you don't have it. You don't
I'm asking you here.
But look, let me think about the facts, okay? You are talking about 90% and 10%. In all the discussions that we have had with the Palestinians in the last 30 years, it has been always around 6 to 7% that Israel will keep it for itself. So it makes, 90 and 10%, this is the proportion.
But would the Arab world go along with this
if
and
the
say,
Palestinians,
we'll give up on the idea of Jerusalem as our capital?
Look, the Arab world will accept everything that the Palestinian Authority will accept.
But will they pressure the Palestinians into accepting it is the question.
To accept
that's what the Americans are trying to do here, to get the Arabs on side.
What I mean to accept is that the Palestinian, the officials, the authority, has to go to the world and say, this is the deal with the Israelis, and I am happy with this.
But also we have to differentiate between the Arab world, meaning the people, and the Arab regimes or the governments. Yes, we are
very different positions, and the Arab regimes might be pressured because of their people. So we're going for a break. We're going for a break. No, we're going for a break. We're going to continue this discussion when we get back from our short break. I'm sorry, U.S. Vice President Mike Pence in Israel. More rolling coverage and discussion in just a minute.
What you need to know, the news, fast and to the point, and the in-depth interviews that will keep you in your seat from the people that you trust. I-24 News presents The New Rundown every Monday through Friday at 1 p.m. Eastern, co-hosted by Nurit Ben and Kalev Ben David. Only on I-24 News.
Unflinching, opinionated. Weeknights, David Schuster and Shayna Estulin bring you analysis, interviews, and opinions that connect us to the Middle East and the world. Watch Crossroads weeknights starting at 6 p.m. Eastern, only on I-24 News.
Welcome back to I-24 News. U.S. Vice President Mike Pence is on his way from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem for the first time since the Americans recognized Jerusalem as the capital of Israel. Our correspondent Jordana Miller is in the old city of Jerusalem. Now, Jordana, what is the purpose of this visit from Mike Pence? Is this just a display of friendship, or is there business on the agenda?
Well, the U.S. officials have said that Mike Pence's visit is really about countering terrorism, regional security issues. And here in Israel, Iran seems to be the issue that will take front and center stage. Now, Netanyahu, in remarks today to the press at his weekly cabinet meeting, he said even before discussing peace and security issues, he talked about Iran. He said he's looking forward to talking to Pence about the Trump administration's efforts to curb Iran's aggression in the region, as well as Iran's nuclear program, their nuclear ambitions. Now, Netanyahu, of course, is very concerned about Iran's entrenchment in southern Syria. That is an issue where he may ask Pence and the Trump administration for more help there, because as the war is winding down there are real fears that there's going to be a new potential threat from southern Syria on Israel's northern border. And, of course, the Iran nuclear deal, which is still hanging in the balance. Possibly discussions about a post-Syria, or we should say a post-Iranian nuclear deal. Should it be canceled? What that might mean, what Israel may want. So we'll have to, it looks like that will be the main issues.
Okay, Jordana, thank you very much for that. Mr. Lebanon, former ambassador of Israel to Egypt. I mean, where does Egypt stand within all this story, specifically of counterterrorism and the fight against Iran? Let's move away from the Israeli-Palestinian conflict for a moment.
Egypt is bleeding, in this fight against terrorism. Apparently, Egypt has strong difficulties to overcome this, or let's say to destroy completely ISIS in Sinai, etc. Egypt needs help. They need two things. First of all, to change the doctrine, the military doctrine, and to adapt it into a fight against terrorism and not the traditional fight in the ground. Secondly, they need help, and the only country who can give the Egyptians a real help is the Americans. I'm sure that Mr. Pence spoke with Abdel Fattah al-Sisi about this. They can provide them with the intelligence. They can, train their people. They can give them, the appropriate weapons in order to fight terrorism, because in Sinai, you cannot send the F-16 to destroy ISIS. You need a different kind of weapons in order to go to climb, you know, for a height of 2,500 meters.
And they need American support for that.
They need the Americans, and I think that the Americans now, they are ready more than before. The question is, if Abdel Fattah al-Sisi will succeed to convince his army to change its military doctrine.
Mohammed Al-Qasem, let's go from the regional affairs perspective back towards domestic politics. Israel's Arab members of parliament are boycotting Mike Pence's visit. Why is that?
In solidarity of the Palestinian people, in solidarity of Jerusalem, as they say, and also to condemn and protest the decision by President Trump, as they say that it was an unfair, unjust decision. They say that they will be attending or inside the parliament, the Knesset, as it's called here in Israel, and then they will walk out once Vice President Pence takes the podium for his speech. They say that they must send a message of condemnation and protest to the U.S. administration.
I mean, Mohammed, explain to me something. I mean, the Egyptians are meeting with Pence. The Jordanians are meeting with Pence. Why do the Arab MKs within Israel have to be more aggressive towards the Americans than the Arab world?
Well, listen, I think they have different interests, and they say that whether it's the Jordanian government or the Egyptian government, they have their own national interests that they have to take care of. They're not obligated to any interests of their own other than to be in solidarity with their brothers in the Palestinian territories.
Those are Israeli MKs. They are not Palestinian MKs. And what the Americans are helping Israel in terms of financial help or economic help, they're not giving the money to a specific, they're giving the money to all the Israelis, and they are part of this. But I think this is a lack of respect for the Americans.
Well, this question should be given to them, and if it's a lack of respect to the Americans, they believe that the Americans did show lack of respect to the Muslims when they did not take into consideration the Jerusalem status. But if this is a democracy, then
let's bring in Mike Wagenheim very briefly. I mean, how is this playing within Israel? Here you have members of parliament who are Israeli citizens in the Israeli parliament objecting to the recognition of the capital city of the country, which they serve as its capital city. I mean, how does the rest of the Israeli public respond to that?
What did Mr. Lebanon just say? It's politics. Everything's politics. They're playing to their voting base. This is how they obtain votes. I'm talking about the Arab members of parliament. They are very pro-Palestinian in their approach. They make no bones about it. And I think the rest of Israel is, there's feigned outrage, and some of it is sincere outrage on occasion. But as a matter of principle, I think the Israeli public just recognizes the Arab members of parliament for what they are and the stance that they take.
It's all drama, it's all theatre, it's nothing that anyone wasn't expecting. Gentlemen, thank you very much. I'm Mohammed Al-Qasem, Mike Wagenheim, Itzhak Lebanon. We're going to be continuing the discussion for the next 48 hours because Vice President Mike Pence has just arrived in Israel. There's still a full-packed agenda in front of us, including tomorrow and Monday. He'll be addressing the Israeli parliament. Thank you very much for joining us on this I-24 News special about U.S. Vice President Mike Pence's visit to Israel. I-24 News and only I-24 News will continue to bring you rolling coverage. Thank you.